So how did England revive their autumn series? So it's great that England could bounce back from the disappointment of last week against Argentina and be a developing team in Japan by over 50 points. Now, looking at it, I wanted to see what were the key points from the game, my takes from the game in terms of positive, negatives, and maybe things to look at. I think the one thing that really struck me was that there was an increased tempo and intensity. And actually, I think that was not brought by the team as a whole, but by the addition of some new players. I think particularly Johnny May, he's renowned for his pace, his elusive running. But actually, I think early on in that game, it was when he chased that kick, even that you could even hear as a fan at home that the whole Twickenham started to get a little bit noisier just because of chasing a ball. And you often think that there's sort of subtle things in a game, but actually, I think if you're playing with that I think the commentator said that is infectious throughout the team. I think that brings that intensity and tempo, and probably quite similar to a big hit in a game or a big turnover. Those are kind of subtle things that actually, I think, particularly in a game of rugby, which is about sort of emotion and momentum, I think they can really bring that. I think equally Sam Simmonds was saying, I think he carried very well, and every time he got the ball, there was an intent and a tempo that he brought to the game. And I thought probably that's potentially the best I've seen him playing in England's shirt, and I was pleased that he was able to see the full 80 out. I think the other thing to note about Johnny May, and I think it's been a little bit disappointing, some of the feedback I've seen around prayer ratings, just because he hasn't scored a try or done what he normally does. I think also I would note that the first try for Freddie Stewart, I think actually a lot of that is down to Johnny May. I think what he does being a winger is he holds his width, and by holding his width, he holds that defender out wide. If you don't do that, then Freddie Stewart has a smaller space in which to go through. But by holding his width, he has a big hole. I think also by the fact that Johnny May is renowned for having that pace, is the defender can't give him, he can't nip back in, he can't give him that, because if the ball goes out wide, he's got no chance. So I think those are little subtle things that, perhaps that isn't just Johnny May, by just having a winger who he's used to playing there and who has sort of actual natural raw pace, it makes a massive difference. So I think, we need to encourage bringing players on who bring that intensity and tempo. I think the one thing that struck me, and again, this hasn't really been reported, was that I still think England really have issues around transition and actually making use of that transition. I've talked about in previous videos by the fact that England struggle when they have a penalty advantage. Still think that's a problem. I still think they use it that well. But I think one of the things is when they get transition, I think what was particularly significant was around about 20 minutes, Porter made a really good rip. And there was obviously across the whole team, there was a lot of ripping going on, but that was a really effective rip. So England were able then to turn over the ball, but it didn't really go to anything. It doesn't really appear to, they don't really appear to use that. So not only is the intensity in which they use from transition good, it doesn't really seem to be a very good output or very successful. Now, if you look at the French team, they are at the moment exceptional at the transition. They are really good. They work on the principle of trying to turn over and then strike hard. New Zealand, historically, I wouldn't say maybe not so much at the moment, but historically were always particularly good at that. And probably even South Africa to a point are very effective at trying to win, some sort of turnover and then transition into an attacking phase. And I think at the moment, England really lack that. And I think that that's something they could bring to their game, because they've got players in there who are making those turnovers and we're winning the ball back, but we're never really showing that attempt. We're showing it in other phases, so off our set phase, like phase 1 and 2 from a set position. But when we've got that broken play from a turnover, just at the moment, I feel like we're missing a trick, really. I think the other thing I would say that came out, and I think there's a bit of a balance to this, was around the relationship. So one of the things that I noted was that the addition of Jack Van Poortvliet, who I thought again had a very assured game and just looks like he should be starting week in, week out, and let's stop tinkering with it. But one thing I thought, his relationship with Freddie Stewart was quite clear. From what I understand, they've played through academy at Leicester. They know each other's games quite well. And I thought often they were running support lines for each other. And I think that's what helped kind of bring the play together. I think equally with those two and Porter, again, teammates. And there was sort of touches where support lines and just knowing where that player was, maybe even what they're calling, they just recognised the pass. And I think that helped that continuity in England's performance. And it got me thinking, actually, relationships and consistency is something that I've been talking about and here, other pundits are talking about. And actually, have we got enough time? So it's a question, really. Have we got enough time in the next 12 months to build those relationships where they don't exist, perhaps at club level or having played previously at international level? There's been a lot of talk about Farrell and Smith, but the question still is there. Whether I think it's going to persevere because they're both world-class players, but what made Ford and Farrell work well was that relationship. And that's just born out of, time spent together, understanding how each other plays. And it might even be those kind of really subtle subconscious things about just hearing that person's voice and picking it up and, acting upon it quickly. So I think, can that be developed, or do we need to, and I suppose equally, Jack Van Poortvliet and Smith is another thing. If we persist with Jack Van Poortvliet, is that relationship, is that strong enough? So 9 and 10, having a strong relationship there can be really important. So it makes you think, is there then a need to have someone if you're going to persevere with Marcus Smith, do you need a Danny Kerr there? Because they've got that relationship at club level, and do England need to look at that throughout? Because I think that some of the success that happened yesterday in the Japanese game was down to the fact that some of the players who came in or playing or starting had that relationship playing together. So I think they're my thoughts going forwards for the game. The New Zealand game coming up is a strange one, really, because, New Zealand were always a barometer of rugby. If we go and turn over New Zealand, then we are world beaters. But, clearly today they scraped past Scotland. They've lost a number of tests in the last year, and they're probably not the New Zealand team of old. However, I do think that if England can put a performance like they did against Japan, but they can work on maintaining that physicality and actually making the right decisions, I think they probably can turn this New Zealand team over. And I think that will give them that momentum when they come up against a better team in South Africa, who were very unlucky not to beat the French. And to be honest, I do believe if they'd kept 15 men on the field, even though France lost a player, but if they had that, I do think South Africa could have and probably should have won that game. So really exciting next 2 weeks to see really where England are at. If all what we're hearing from the club, from the camp is right, then England should be peaking for these 2 games. And if England can come away with 3 victories in the autumn series, and I think that gives them a really good platform going into the World Cup next year, and being able to fine tune and get that selection right for the Six Nations. So please keep watching the videos. We'll build on some of the things, some themes. If there's any questions out there, then do ask them. Sometimes it's quite good to have a look at a different angle of things. I'm looking forward to what the selection looks like on Thursday. Take care. Bye-bye.